Okay, so we're going to start with an AC method example, which is going to be a trinomial. The form of a trinomial is ax squared plus bx plus c. There'll be times that it'll be set equal to 0, and that actually means that we're finding numerical values for our x. If it's not set equal to 0, then you end up just getting like factors for your answer. Specifically, the AC method problem or example that you would need to pay attention to in the exam would be whenever it's asking you to find the domain. So say you have an AC method problem, right, a trinomial in your denominator, right? So what we would need to do is factor it, which means put it into its parentheses, but because it's in the denominator, what can't a denominator equal? 0. So whatever factors I end up finding, I would have to actually set them equal to 0 to see what my x values can't be, right? Okay, so let's say for our example, what we have, it's actually easier than these. I think I'm just gonna make one up. Say we have x squared, 115, 3 and 5 is 8, positive 8x, and then 3 and 5, 15, a positive 15. Say that's the trinomial that we have. And in the form that it is now with an x squared, I can't easily figure out what a single x value is. I need to actually have them with exponents being 1, and then I can figure out what my x is. So what I would do is the AC method here, and then go ahead and set everything equal to 0 if you have an AC method, right? Problem, a trinomial in your denominator, okay? Like if it tells you to find the domain, this is what you do, y'all. So my A is my coefficient of my first variable, which is 1. And then my B is the coefficient of my second, which is 8. And then my C would be the coefficient of my third term, which is 15. AC method quite literally means multiply your A times your C. So if you do A times C, we get 1 times 15, which equals 15. If you factor that, you put a big capital T. What multiplies together to give me 15? 1 times 15, yeah, you're right, and then 3 and 5, right? Always kind of do the one that's the 1 times itself, because you'd be surprised. There'll be some examples where like that ends up being the factors you need. 3 and 5 is more obvious for a lot of people, but try to list all of them, okay? So for this particular problem, I know that these factors multiply together to give me 15. I need factors that combine together that will give me my B, which is an 8, which would be the 3 and 5, right? That equals 8, which equals my B, which is what I wanted. And what I mean by those are the ones I want, these are the 2 factors that I'm going to use to expand my B term. So that instead of a trinomial, I have 4 terms so that I can do factor by grouping. So quite literally, I'm going to just bring down my first term, which is an x squared. And then this middle term, I'm expanding with these 2 terms right here. Because these 2 terms are basically rewriting my 8x, they're both going to have an x with them. So mathematically, all I did was rewrite it. I didn't change it. The value's still the same, right? Now, factor by grouping, what we do is we're going to split down the middle. I do it right in front of the sign, so I don't like accidentally put a line through a negative sign and it looks positive. Like do it right next to it. Basically, from here on out, what we do is a whole bunch of greatest common factors. I'm going to pull stuff out, right? So if I look at my x squared and my 3x, the only thing they have in common is an x. What I mean by pull out the GCF is here I divide. So I take each individual term and I divide it by what I pulled out, by the GCF. If you do x squared divided by x, the exponent rules says that what you do is you keep and you subtract the exponents. So it just becomes x, right? And then here, if you do 3x over x, my x's would cancel. The only thing I'm left with is that positive 3. Super important step here, bring that sign down, whatever it is. This is a positive, so I bring down a positive. When I look at my 5x and my 15, my thought process is what is the largest number that will equally divide both of those? The largest number would be 5. 5 divides 5, 5 divides 15. The reason why I care about it dividing equally is because that's the next step. It is going to be division. They don't have an x in common, so I wouldn't pull one out. It's not a part of the greatest common factor, right? So now I do my division. I do 5x divided by 5. My 5's cancel, but you're still left with your x, right? And then if you do 15 divided by 5, we get 3. Those signs are the same, so it's positive. Here also, it's another GCF. What do they have in common? Pull it out. I usually just check. Do these sets of parentheses match? They do. I just need to write one of them. And then what's left over goes into a set of parentheses together. But if y'all wanted to see the actual GCF way, same thing, kind of a splitting here and looking at the GCF. This is one term. That whole thing right there, that's one term. This whole thing right here, that's one term. What do they have in common? This. Pull it out and then divide. It's a lot of steps when you don't have to necessarily do that. If you see these match, write it once. What's left over, put in parentheses together. So as far as just a normal factoring a trinomial using the AC method problem, that's your answer, right? But if you're taking an exam and it's in the denominator and you know your denominator can't equal 0, right? What you would do is, when does this trinomial equal 0? Well, I've already factored it. The only way I can figure out when it is 0 is to set these factors equal to 0, right? And then you would solve that little equation right there. I would get x equals -3, and I would get x equals -5. So that's actually telling me that when my x values are -3 or -5, my denominator, right, would end up being 0. This trinomial would end up being 0. And if it's in the denominator, then you're dividing by 0, which we can't do. So it's actually, what we need to know is that it can't be these values. That's the main important thing. You're finding a domain of a function and it is in a fraction form, and you have a trinomial in the denominator. Not only do you AC method it, but you need to set it equal to 0. And we need to know these are the values it can't be, right? Because if you're finding the domain, we need to actually be able to write, basically it would be -5, right? And then we would combine that with a -3 and then combine. So all the domains of the other functions are just real numbers because they're all going to be polynomials. But if it's a fraction and if there's a trinomial, it gets a little bit more tricky. Now I'm going to go ahead and say this. I just now showed you the AC method way of factoring a trinomial. In problems, if it doesn't explicitly state use AC method, if y'all know how to do trial and error or whatever method you know to get to here, you're welcome to do that. As long as you know that if your goal is to find the domain, you have to set those equal to 0, right? Because we have to figure out what can't my denominator equal. And in this specific problem, I know that my denominator cannot equal a negative, not my denominator, my x's cannot equal a -5 or a -3 because then my denominator equals 0, okay? Does that make sense, y'all? Clear as mud? Okay. So let's do 1B on the review. And y'all, I've got reviews down here. If you don't have one, you can grab it, okay? So for 1B, it gives me this relation. I get 4, 3, and And then that purple one over there is going to be the answer key, okay? You can grab that one right there, Remy. 4, 3, and then I've got 4, 7, and then I've got an 8, 3. So the first step in this problem, whenever you see this relation, is to determine whether or not it's a function. So what we know about functions when we're looking at relations is that my x values can only have one y value. My input can only have one output, right? So I'm going to tell you now, if you look at a relation and your x's repeat, it's not a function. If you can look at your x's and go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and nothing repeats, it's function, right? When I go and read just the x values, I get 4, 4, nope. It's not a function. It already failed because this is saying that my 4 goes to 3 and my input of 4 is also going to 7. So that means that no, it's not a function. So the first step was to determine, right, if it was or was not a function. So nope, not function. And then it's going to tell me to do my domain and my range. Okay, I'm completely okay with y'all on the exam, capital D, do some braces, write your x values. You don't have to write out the word domain. Like, I know what you mean, okay? So my domain is my x values. Literally look here. I've got 4, 4, and 8. You're not going to write 4 twice. You're just going to write 4 once. And even though it's not a function, you still have the ability to write the domain and the ranges of all of them, function or not, okay? And then for my range is my y values. If I look at my y values, I get 3, 7, 3. The only thing I need to write though is 3 and 7. Does that make sense? Look at your x values. If you see the same x value more than once, it is not a function. Domain, list your x's. Range, list your y's. And then you're done with that first problem of the exam, okay? Goodness gracious. Let's do problem 2. Okay, so of course I did 2B or not B. It says evaluate the function at the given values of the independent variable and simplify. So evaluate the function to me means I'm actually going to solve something, right? It tells me, what is B? Where am I? Okay, my B is f of x, and then I've got equal 8x minus 8. And then I've got I've got 3 different things that I'm evaluating it at. I can't breathe. So I'm actually going to write them like this so we can solve them this way. I'm going to evaluate this at f of 7. And then I'm going to evaluate this at f of x plus 3. And then I'm going to evaluate it at f of negative x. This is similar to how it's going to look on the exam. It'll have the same directions. It'll list the function you're looking at. And then if there's like an A, B, or C part, like if there's multiple things you're going to do to this one problem, it's usually going to be listed A, B, C, like find these individual things, okay? Some might tell you to do 2 things, but I think I did try to, like if it says point slope and slope intercept, I think I left blanks with the name point slope for you to enter it in, okay? So hopefully it's fairly easy.